If you're curious about Web3, I have no doubt that this is going to be the future of technology in the years to come. And the sooner you jump in and dive into this space, you're going to be a lot better off for it. So if you're sitting on the fence, jump off the fence and jump into this new brave world.
Hello and welcome to the Blockchain Pro podcast. I'm Adriana, and today I'm speaking to Chris Wurr, founder of Verida. We talk about how his professional life happened to follow the evolution of the internet and the role of Web3 in the future of technology. Let's get to know Chris. Hey, Chris.
Hey, Adriana. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to have you on as well. Let's dig right in, shall we?
Let's.
Tell me, what's your story? Why did you decide to work in technology?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, that does go back to my early days. I still remember being in primary school, I think year 5 or 6, and having at lunchtime, I sort of broke one of the computers and I had to get floppy disks. And I had 30 floppy disks and I had to go and put them all in one by one to reinstall Windows 3.1 and reinstall Microsoft Office. And at an early age, I was always sort of very curious about technology and computers and had a very, I guess, inquisitive nature that technology tended to feed quite well. So from an early age, had that sort of interest and that sort of just continued to develop and grow. As I sort of got a bit older, I realized that you could actually make some money doing this stuff, which was obviously a lovely bonus. I had a few attempts at sort of going to university, but I always sort of ended up back building software, earning money, playing around with different entrepreneurial ideas. So yeah, look, I've been a professional software engineer developer for over 20 years, which makes me feel very old, but been doing that since I was really a teenager. Yeah, we probably wouldn't have it any other way. I love it. I love the technology. I love the innovation opportunities, the challenges that are, it's always an evolving space. There's always something new to learn. You think you know everything, but you never do. And it's a great opportunity to continue to grow.
Absolutely. You mentioned 20 years there. So that takes us back to about 2001. Which is the beginning of Web 2. So were you already programming when Web 1 just started? Because that was like the cusp, right? Web 1 was maybe 5 years, and then Web 2 came about 2001, 2002. What was the difference, and how does that compare with, Web 3? Well, what the hell is that?
Yeah, so we have... Well, back then, I still remember going around to my grandfather's house because he was the only person that had the internet with a dial-up modem, and going on to, I don't even know what the browser was back then. It would have probably been Netscape or something like that, and searching bulletin boards. And the internet back then was very much read-only, so very much Web 1. I would characterize as sort of, surfing the web, browsing for content, and consuming, just reading. And that was probably late 90s. And then obviously in there we had a bit of a dot-com boom and bust and some other fun stuff in sort of the tech space. But I then got into Perl programming, so starting to learn how to develop in Perl because that was sort of CGI scripts. So that was the ability to sort of start to create cool things like a shopping cart with cookies. And so that was sort of my early introduction into Web 2, creating this sort of more interactive web, which was incredibly fascinating to me. I could, create new things and explore ideas and look at a new website and then try to replicate that myself. So yeah, started building websites for people, shopping carts. This was before there were sort of any sort of frameworks. You had to do everything by hand. So you're sort of learning from the bottom up back in those days. And so that was very much the early days of Web 2. I still have a very big regret back then. I was still sort of a teenager and I was walking down one of the main streets in my local town and I was knocking on doors of real estate agents saying, hey, I'll sell you a website. And they were all saying, oh, no, the internet's too slow. Nobody's really using it. And I just wish I had the idea of realestate.com. I'll just give it to you for free. I'll create the app. You just start listing your properties for free, and it would have been set for life. But you live and you learn. And I think some of those things that I've seen over the journey of the last 20 years, you see patterns, repeatable patterns, and you see that as Web 2's evolved, the concept of you give it away for free and then you build in different pricing models, and that sort of SaaS subscription model has evolved, in that time in Web 2. And then, of course, now we're moving to Web3, where it's all flipping again. It's all new types of models here with tokenization and more community, perhaps a little bit less sort of competitive sort of nature, and new ways of building technology, innovating and creating collaborative sort of partnerships.
Yeah, and those concepts, if someone is new to the space, they are kind of hard to understand because there are so many moving parts. So if you could put it very simply, what is the main difference between Web 2 and Web 3? And how can people think about it moving forward? How can people get involved in this? I'm doing air quotes here, in this movement, because it is a movement right now, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think, if you think of Web 2 as being this read-write web, the ability to consume content. It was the introduction of social media so that you could write content, you could post a tweet, you could post a photo on Facebook. It was very much interactive and social. And obviously that was a big step up from Web 1. Where Web 3 comes in is I guess, a lot more about that collaboration, that ownership, that identity. So in Web 2, you go to, so let's say Facebook or Twitter, you go to a centralized website where somebody, like Mark Zuckerberg owns that platform and controls it. Whereas in the Web 3 world, it's more about community ownership, collaboration. And so as an individual, you can look at a project in Web 3 and go, hey, I want to get involved. I want to participate. I think this is a great initiative, a great concept. And you can get involved in lots of different ways. You can perhaps buy some tokens that represent value in that particular project. You might be able to earn some tokens by adding value into that project, whether as a developer or perhaps providing marketing and communication support to the project, writing documentation. There's lots of ways that people can get involved, even if they're not technical, business development. And then there's a governance. So there's the ability in Web3 to create these sort of new types of governance structures that allow people to participate in decision making and determining the direction of projects. And what I find really fascinating is that we're still very early in how the technology can enable these new primitive, I guess, pieces or foundational kind of capabilities, but we're already seeing a huge wave of innovation, new ways of people collaborating, and projects that you just wouldn't even think of in the traditional business world. The traditional kind of dog-eat-dog competitive world starts to become possible in this sort of new Web3 environment.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think that's where Verida,
yes.
Well, I have a Brazilian background, so Latin, for me, I've always read Verida. That's how we would say in Portuguese, but all right.
I like the trail. You can run with that. The trail on
Verida.
the A, I like it. It's good. Yes.
But okay, so tell us about Verida and what problem you're solving.
Yeah, sure. So Verida is sort of a play on words a little bit. So it's sort of an abbreviation of verification, identity and data. At a high level, I guess that's what we're looking to bring together is, identity, data, verification, and tying all that together is blockchain. I might come back a little bit in terms of how sort of Verida came about, because I think that helps put some context into the problem we're looking to address. So I previously had a company a number of years ago, and we were building CRM software. So we're building software to manage casework for clients, and that was handling very sensitive information. So we were handling information about sort of domestic violence case notes, people that had financial difficulties, issues with children, family support cases. And we had a lot of very sensitive information that we had to protect and secure. We had to think about the security of that from a technology perspective. We had to think about the user experience of how that data is shared and who can have access to it, so that consent and do that in a sensible way. I had to think about jurisdictional concerns. Data couldn't leave Australia, so you had to host it here. You couldn't sort of use an overseas hosting service provider or other SaaS platform to build a solution. And in addition to that, we had about 150 customers when I sort of left the company, and all of those were custom pieces of software, and they all had different common components. And so there was this very interesting architecture. How do we have generic code and modules and then have custom pieces and end up with a solution that actually still works for everyone? So I learned a lot there from, I guess, a technology standpoint, but also from that user experience standpoint. And one of the things that really stood out was if I came to you and I had a traumatic event in my past and I had to tell that to you to try and get some support, you'd enter that into your computer. You'd sort of type that up into the computer, add some notes, record the key points regarding that issue. And you'd then you might refer me to 2 or 3 different people. And so now I go and see 2 or 3 other people and I have to repeat that story. And it could be traumatic for me to repeat that story. And so I'm actually repeating the trauma. And fundamentally what's happening here is that it's the computer systems, the way that we've structured how we manage information, how we, digitally kind of connect with each other is broken. It's not my story anymore. I'm sort of putting my story out in all these other places. And I realize that fundamentally the fact that we've lost control of our own digital identity, our own data, is actually a really fundamental failing, I think, of how we've evolved into this sort of Web 2 world. And I guess I'm a really strong believer that it's an opportunity with Web 3 to kind of reinvent that relationship that we have with our own data, how we share that, the consent we give to that, and how we rethink interoperability of our own private information across different systems. So with that sort of lens, I sort of started a research project of, okay, well, how can blockchain help with this? It should, one of the promises of blockchain is self-sovereignty and, user control and agency. And, as a technologist, I sort of want to use technology to improve the world wherever possible. So went down that rabbit hole and I guess came to the point after a while, about 6 months, that there were some missing pieces in the Web3 technology stack. And if you think of blockchain being decentralized computation, if you're building a traditional Web2 application, you need lots of different pieces of a puzzle. You need, a front end, you need authentication. So you normally have like an email and password. You need to have messaging. So you normally have an email address so that you can receive a message. You need to be able to store your private data, needs to be stored securely somewhere. In Web2, that's stored on somebody else's servers, which is a problem. So we want to try and fix that. But on Web3, most of the storage is public or distributed. Maybe it's encrypted, but it's still, you don't have control over where it's stored or what country and things like that.
Let's pause there for a second, because in Web 2, the data is stored in someone else's server. And in Web 3, it's distributed. But I don't have a server, so it's still not my server. So what is the difference there? Because I think that's a key point that a lot of people gloss over. And it's hard for, noobs to understand what is the key difference there.
That's a really good call out. So the way that I characterize it is, in Web 2, your data is stored on somebody else's server, so you don't have any control, agency. You sign that terms and conditions, they can go and sell your data, they can use it to target you with ads, all sorts of things. So obviously that's not great. Web 3 at the moment is primarily where you can have your data, but it gets sharded. So it gets split up into lots of different pieces and it gets distributed to lots of anonymous servers. Sometimes it's encrypted, sometimes it's not. So there's 2 things to distinguish between decentralization, which means that you have sort of your own agency and control and everybody has their own agency and control. And then there's the distribution. And so if you think of, at the moment, things like IPFS, the data is effectively distributed across lots of different servers and you have no control or agency over where that's stored. We see that as a fundamental problem. At the end of the day, as a user, I want to say, well, I want my data in Australia, or I want my data spread across 3 different servers, or I want the option to spin up my own server and have all of my data stored on my own server and choose my own backup policies because I'm kind of technical. Other people, they will want to just press a drop-down button and say, okay, I want my data here and never think about it again. But the important thing is that there's control there and there's an architecture that gives that control. And that's, I guess, the fundamental foundational mindset that we're coming at this data problem with Verida. And when you start to think of complex use cases like healthcare, where there's often requirements that data is stored in a particular country or has some sort of regulatory component around how it's stored, or financial data, it's really important that the technology, has these fundamental capabilities considered from the very beginning.
All right, and so you are doing exactly that.
We've basically created that storage infrastructure. So we've created those storage nodes. We've also created a framework. So I talked before about all those different pieces that you need to build a Web3 application, of which blockchain is one of about 5. We've actually created a framework so that we can plug in all those different pieces. So we can plug in the blockchain, the messaging, the private data storage, and then make that available to developers as an SDK. So as a developer, you can pull down the Verida SDK and go, okay, great, I've got a toolbox, all of the capabilities that I need to build an app that could compete with a traditional Web2 application. It's all here, it's all at my fingertips to start building really interesting and new things. So we've built that framework, and we've had to, as I mentioned on the data piece, we've had to fill in some of those gaps. So for today, we've built a private personal storage infrastructure. We've done some things there around messaging and identity, but it's all within our framework, which is designed to be modular. So in 6 months' time, there's some new amazing private data storage that meets those criteria that I was talking about. we'll be able to plug that in, and that can become another storage engine. Similarly with the messaging, there's other identity standards that we are interoperable with. So our first objective is to put together something that developers can use to build Web 2 style apps in Web 3 from day one. And then our longer term strategy is to open this up as much as we possibly can and allow other projects, other Web 3 technologies as they evolve to
and
plug
boy,
in.
do we need that.
Yes, it's a very complicated landscape at the moment with Web3, and it's a challenging user experience as well for both developers and end users, which I guess Verida, we want to try and take some ownership of trying to improve that user experience on both of those sort of user types.
The interesting thing there, I sit on both ends. I'm trying to build something, but I'm a user of something. And I sit on the user scale of, I'm an advanced user, so the interface doesn't have to be that great for me, and I can still sort of like navigate, which is a privilege. And we're trying to solve this problem on the side where let's make these interfaces easier to use, let's make the user experience good. So, when the masses come, it'll be seamless. That's good. And then on the other side, okay, I want to build something. It's a platform, but I don't want it to be a middleman platform. I want it to be a self-sovereign platform where the participants own it and they make decisions about it. And yes, I can build that, but I don't want to stick it on AWS. I want it, to be truly Web3. So I think we're getting there, right?
We are getting there. We are definitely getting there. I think the other thing to call out is that you're right, like the end user, obviously you and I are probably more advanced users in this space, but if we want mass adoption, we need it to be super simple. You look back at Web 2, actually Web 1 even, the first web browser was like just text. And it wasn't until really you got images and you had some HTML where you could format things, it became more usable. And that was where we sort of got mass adoption, I think, with the Web 1. And so I think we're at a very similar stage with Web 3. It's still kind of clunky and you have to do a lot of stuff manually. You have to kind of understand what's happening. But, the next evolution is that that's a lot simpler and you don't even know that you're using sort of blockchain or, maybe you understand it's Web 3, but you don't really understand as a user what really that means. It's just that you're getting a better experience. You've got more control. Maybe you're earning some sort of token and revenue from the different services you're using and you're like, hey, this is great. But you don't necessarily have that technical understanding of what's going on behind the scenes.
The same way a lot of users don't have the technical understanding of what goes on behind the scene on a web browser and how you're calling. How does YouTube work? You just click play and the video plays, but the back end is a very complicated engine.
There's a lot of magic going on there.
Exactly.
Yes.
All right, and you have started building your blogs and you decided to build with you're starting with 2 different blockchains. How's that work? Are you going to integrate more things? What is the roadmap?
Yeah, sure. So what we've actually done is we've focused on this private storage messaging identity framework, which is, I guess we call it just the Verida framework. But it's all off-chain. There's no, by definition, it kind of can work if you just spin up your own node and talking to other people, it can kind of work, but you need a way of discovering people. So that's where blockchain is really great. You can have the ability to, on a blockchain, register yourself, make yourself discoverable as a participant, maybe as a hosting provider, a service provider providing hosting infrastructure or messaging infrastructure. And so the decentralized sort of blockchain can provide a really important connectivity piece. So at this stage, we've focused on, I guess, all the technology behind the storage, the messaging and all of that. And now we're connecting it to the blockchain. We're doing that in 2 important ways. So the first way is, as I said, providing some of those smart contracts for the connectivity. So all the network participants can kind of connect with each other and discover each other. We're also building out the ability for off-chain data to become available on-chain. So that means that, let's say you're using Ethereum and you want to write a smart contract, and perhaps you want to have a zero-knowledge proof around the proof that somebody has been verified through a valid KYC provider. Our model will allow any type of data such as that sort of zero knowledge proof to be used as an input into a smart contract and the signature schemes to be matching up. So suddenly we're unlocking all of an individual's private personal data to be made available in a smart contract with consent. So obviously not all data would want to be shared, but that unlocks really interesting use cases like, for instance, insurance, automatic insurance claims and things like that require real world data to be used as an input to unlock
And when
claims.
you say unlock, that means with users' permission.
Everything is with the user's permission, exactly right. So you could think of it as like you At the moment, you might use MetaMask to sign a transaction and the user is, agreeing, consenting to sign that transaction. It's very much the same. It's consenting to share this specific piece of information on this particular smart contract. A flag, obviously, whatever information is going to be made public, and then consenting to that as a part of participating in that particular interaction. So it's tying together the data on the blockchain, which we think can unlock an immense number of, really exciting use cases.
And what happens to privacy in a case like that? Let's say I'm unlocking to my insurance information about my medical history.
Yeah, so there's two things there. So you need to think about what's on-chain and what's off-chain. In the Verida model, so Adriana, let's say you've created a Web3 health system and I come along to your application and I can scan a QR code that would be embedded in your app on my phone. And we have like a mobile app, the Verida Vault, which is like stores your encryption keys and your blockchain keys and all of your encrypted data. And I consent to unlocking a subset of my data for that particular application. So I consent to saying, okay, Adriana's health app can access some of my health data, maybe not all of it, but that data is still only accessible in the web browser. You don't have a server. So it's not like you can go and peek in as the owner of that application and see all of that data. It's just that the application has that in the browser, in the cache, to conduct, create a user interface and allow you as a user to perform the operations that your app provides. So that's a really important distinction there. And then the next step is, let's say I do need to interact with a smart contract that your health application provides. Again, that's like a transaction, and that would pop up and say, okay, let's say I'm going to get, the Web3 app allows you to get $20 off your insurance every month if you can prove that you've run 20 kilometers every month. So in that case, a pop-up would pop up on my phone where it says, hey, the Adriana Health app is requesting access to proof that says that you have run 20 kilometers a month for the last 3 months. These are the verified data providers. Yes, I consent to that. And then that gets submitted on chain and that becomes a verifiable proof. Now, I may not decide to do that. I may decide, hey, I don't want to make that information more publicly available, so I'm not going to do that. But there's choice there, there's consent there. And I think over time we'll learn some strategies there where smart contracts can be developed in a way that minimizes the amount of data that's required to be put on chain, but can still achieve the objective that they're trying to meet.
It's a work in progress, right? We cannot solve all of these problems without first start thinking of, okay, what is the problem that we can solve right now? How big is this problem? Divide that into chunks and then going chunk by chunk by chunk, how the pieces fit together and how you can solve them one step at a time, which takes time.
Exactly right. Yes, and that's the joy of Web3. It's constantly innovating. There's constantly new ideas. It's a real melting pot of innovation.
So what's coming?
There's a lot coming. Well, I guess multi-chain. That's the key thing. So coming back to, I guess, to your original question is, we see that it's a multi-chain world. That's what we'll live in. And it's important that as a user, I have some data. I can use that on multiple chains, use it on multiple smart contracts. So it's a really important interoperability layer there. So that's a key part of our roadmap is, creating infrastructure there that's interoperable. So that means that our framework can talk to multiple blockchains. It means that our mobile phone wallet Vault can talk to multiple blockchains. And it's also about interoperability of data. If you've got a health app and then I go and use Jane's health app and Sam's health app, there needs to be some consistency there that the data is the same. And so we've got the concept of schemas, which is really important. We've got an architecture there that's designed to allow that data to be reused across lots of different apps. So that's a part of our roadmap, I guess, is expanding the capabilities there and showcasing how that works. We also have the Web2 world has a business model, which is really where you are the product and you are sold to, and your data is used for targeted advertising, and centralized companies make a living and make a profit from that. And there's a really good opportunity here to reinvent that. So a key part of our roadmap is to reinvent that model. And the way that we're going to do that is allow a user to interact with other applications and other users. And as they do that, they can actually earn our Verida token. And that Verida token can then allow them to pay for their infrastructure, their hosting, their backups, the other services on the network that they want to make use of. So the end result is that as an end user, ideally, as I use the network, it's actually paying for itself, and I'm still getting that free model that we expect from Web 2, but I can also perhaps own a part of it, or perhaps I'm a heavy user, so I can then actually be more involved and active in the network. And so we're trying trying to effectively create this new business model that replicates that free model, but also creates a viable revenue stream for developers that build meaningful apps on the network too. So that's a key part of our roadmap. So we'll be releasing our white paper shortly. That'll have a lot more information, and there's some interesting ideas that I don't think have really been done before. So I'd definitely welcome people that are listening to have a look, and welcome all feedback and insight as we go down this journey.
Absolutely. I will add all your links to, the description of this podcast, your Discord. There's always lots of interesting conversations going on, right?
Definitely.
All right.
Definitely.
So let's get to the quick three. What are you reading right now, Chris?
So I'm actually reading a new book by Ray Dalio, the sort of well-known investor. It's called Principles for Dealing with the Changing World. And it's very interesting because it's talking about the 80 to 100-year cycle that we have typically at a macro level around financial markets and around currencies. And there's a lot of stuff that we assume is stable that actually isn't very stable when you go back to sort of Roman times and different Chinese sort of dynasties. And obviously the Dutch sort of came and went there for a while, and the English too. So obviously in the current landscape that we're in, and obviously the recent times with the crypto market sort of falling quite heavily recently, there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. And this is an incredible book because it has a lot of data. It's just all backed up by data and incredible amount of research and some really insightful learning. So if you're unsure about what's happening in the world at a macro level and if you're interested in some of the finance side of things, definitely recommend checking it out.
I will add to my to-read list, which gets longer and longer every time. Are you reading that in reading, or is that an audiobook? Do you know?
Yeah, it's a challenge. It's an audio book, but because it's got these really great graphs, so it's got a PDF, and so you kind of listen and then you're like, oh, I really want to get the PDF, but I can't right now. And yeah, so it's actually a bit tricky. I'd love to have the time in my life where I could just sit and look at the physical book and read it, but not a practical thing
when
right now.
When we're building stuff, there's not a lot of time to sit down quietly with a book.
Unfortunately not. One day maybe.
And at least in my case, when I do have those time, I'm going to read fiction.
Yeah, fair enough.
So what's your favorite resource?
There's a website, figment.io, and it's a really good resource if you're a developer or you're interested in learning more about the different tools, the different platforms, different blockchains. So they've got really good tutorials, how-to guides, documentation. So they've kind of got like a network of people that help build really valuable content to learn new things. So, if you do have an interest in Web3 and you're wanting to learn more about it, definitely recommend going to figment.io and looking at the learn page.
And
there.
What's your favorite project?
Well, this is an impossible question, isn't it, really? So if you look at, just the obvious things, just Bitcoin and Ethereum in terms of their respective groundbreaking nature, I think you can't ignore that as much as I think we take that for granted sometimes after a little while when you're in this space, but, you have to put a lot of respect, I think, back to the roots of a lot of this sort of emerging Web3 crypto space. I think if there's one I'd call out, other than obviously Verida, which I'm obviously very passionate about, but the Graph, I think, is a really interesting project. They're performing a really interesting role in terms of indexing in a decentralized way, large amounts of content on blockchain. And at a technical level, that's a challenging problem to do that at scale. And at the moment, it looks like they've got some really excellent, great concept, really good execution, and really good technology. And if you look at, I guess, projects that you respect and see that they're executing really well, I think that's probably a good
amazing.
One to look at.
We hit the end. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can check out our website, verida.io. You can definitely encourage people to have a look at the different capabilities that we've got there. If you're interested in building in Web3, maybe you're not even a developer, but you've got an idea that you want to run with, have a look at some of the solutions and use cases that people are building, because they're not necessarily what you'd normally think of as Web3 projects, healthcare and insurance and things like that. If you are a developer, definitely join our Discord, look at our developer documentation. We've got demos there. We've got walkthroughs. You can dive straight into code in the browser and start playing with things. But yeah, I guess probably my call out just as a whole would be, if you're curious about Web3, if you've got any interest at all, I have no doubt that this is going to be the future of technology in the years to come. And the sooner you jump in and dive into this space and, read a Medium post or jump on Twitter and learn something, like, you're going to be a lot better off for it. So if you're sitting on the fence, I call you out now, if you're listening, to jump off the fence and jump into this new brave world.
Yes, dive right in, baby. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you, Adriana. Really appreciate it. Cheers.
And that was Chris Ware.
To connect with Chris and follow the work his team is doing at Verida, check the links in the description. Remember, comments, suggestions, a little ping to say hello are always appreciated. You can find my links in the description as well. Let's connect everywhere. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I will see you on the next vlog. Bye.